What's going on, guys? In this video, I want to talk about my experience with Launch School's JS120 Object-Oriented Programming course. Now, if you're new to this channel and you haven't heard, first, make sure to go hit the like and subscribe buttons so you can get notified anytime that I come out with a new video. And then next, go head over to launchschool.com to check out their amazing course and website that explains all about some of the course that I'm going to get into in this video. So in this video, I'm going to talk specifically about the second course in Launch School's JavaScript track, JS120, their object-oriented programming course. I'm going to talk about my experience in the course, what I did to get through it and to lead up to the oral and written exam portions of that course. And then in a follow-on video, I'm going to talk specifically about study tactics I used for that portion of the course, JS129, the written and oral examination, and then I'm going to get into a little bit of how I felt about that exam in the next video. But in this video, I'm going to talk just about the course material. So first of all, if you're not familiar with Launch School, make sure to go check out the website. None of this video is going to make sense if you don't understand what that program is about, and I've covered that in previous videos, so I'm not going to go over that here. So for JS120, their object-oriented programming course. Overall, this course has everything that you'd expect in any object-oriented focused course on JavaScript. But without getting into too much detail, specifically, the course covers object literals, object factories, constructors and prototypes, objects, looking up other objects, ES6 classes, and how to use all those different object creation patterns, and they compare and contrast the different styles of object creation and when you might want to use them, and some of the pros and cons of choosing one versus the other object creation pattern. You learn about things like encapsulation, polymorphism, inheritance, both prototypical and pseudo-classical inheritance in the JavaScript language. You learn about how to use mix-ins, and just a lot of the different ways to use inheritance. And again, some of the pros and cons of using different types of inheritance and how they should factor into your decisions you're making as a programmer when you're using these different object creation patterns. So context. This course goes very deep into some of the ways that JavaScript determines execution context in its object-oriented programming, how you can lose that context, and some of the different ways that context is lost in JavaScript, how to avoid that, how to work around it, and how to plan your code so that you're avoiding some of those errors you could run into due to context loss. So what I liked about this course and what I didn't like actually turned out to be the same thing. So for me, overall, the most, overwhelming part of object-oriented programming, or the way it was presented initially, were all the different object creation patterns, all the different design patterns you can use in JavaScript, and all the flexibility it gives to programmers. This is a little bit confusing, and it has a little bit to do with the history of the language, how it was developed, and then some of the object creation patterns and object-oriented programming patterns other programmers are going to be familiar with when they come to the JavaScript language, and JavaScript's developers and maintainers over time trying to make the language more in line with what other programmers would expect coming to the language. So because of this, there's just a ton of different ways to create objects and create object-oriented programs in the language, and it can make it confusing for someone that's just coming to the language for the first time. To give a little contrast, the first time that I learned object-oriented programming, it was in the Python programming language, and overall I felt that it was simpler to grasp up front, but the thing that made this course so strong was that by the time I got through it, I did have a far greater depth of understanding of object-oriented programming, even though I felt that in JavaScript, object-oriented programming is a little bit more complex just because of all those options for your object design patterns that I talked about earlier. Now, what I liked and didn't like really was just how compressed all that different knowledge about object design patterns was when I went through the course. Now, what's interesting about this is also what I liked about the course, because as I went through the course, they actually depreciated the version of the course that I was going through and came out with a new version of the course which dealt with the exact problem that I just mentioned. All these different object creation patterns, these object design patterns, these object-oriented programming patterns you can use to create these programs, they can get very complex, especially when they're presented one after the other without a break. Some exercises, some compare and contrast programs, so you can look at how the different programs are built using these object creation patterns. So what I like is in the second version of the course they came out with, they split all these different versions of object-oriented programming in JavaScript up, so it was much more succinct and much more clear as you learned each type. For example, when you go over factory functions, and then go over constructors and prototypes, and then go over using objects, looking up other objects, and then go over ES6 classes. Those are all split up in a much more succinct and clear way in the second version of the course, and they give you much more time to ingest the material, sit and think about it, go through some exercises that really compare and contrast that design pattern with what you just learned previously, and then move to the next section where you compare and contrast with the previous section and the section before that, and you get enough depth and breadth of exercises at each step so that by the time you move to the next design pattern, you're very clear on what the differences are, the different contexts you would want to use that design pattern in, and how it fits into your overall thinking about object-oriented programs in JavaScript. So what I originally did not like about the program has now been fixed, and is what I liked most about the new version that they just released of JS120 object-oriented programming. So what's great is if you're going through the course now, you're going to get that version of the course, and I guarantee that for JavaScript, this is going to be better than any other object-oriented programming course you have taken. And while I haven't taken them all, so I can't technically say that, I'm just going to go ahead and roll with it because I thought that it was just very well designed, very in-depth, and it was at each step of the course, it was just very succinct and clear and easy to understand. So I appreciated that. The overall experience with the course was good. In the next video, as I mentioned, I'm going to get into a little bit of how I studied, but to do a little bit of a teaser for that, it's really just going to be a lot of repetition, which I'll get into more detail in the next video. But the last thing I wanted to add to this video is I want to go back on something that I said in a previous video about an issue that I had with Launch School in general. And what I mentioned was one of the only downsides I felt there was about the course was this idea that there wasn't a lot of direction from the TAs or direct support when you're in the course. And what I had pointed out to me was that the reason I may have felt that way is because I wasn't actually utilizing the main resource to get specific questions answered in the course, which is the forums for the course. So when I actually went over and looked into the forums, I saw that the best way to get direct support for a specific question is to come up with a succinct, clear, well-formatted question, drop it into the forums, and let other students as well as TAs comment on it and help you with the troubleshooting process you might be in for any question you have about either an example question in the course or an answer to that question that you might be trying to come up with. So make sure if you guys are going through the course to not rely on just being able to ask TAs directly or other students directly specific questions. Basically, don't rely on hand-holding. Make sure that you utilize all the resources that are given to you, because in the long run, this is going to make you a better software engineer, a better coder. If you're working at a company, regardless of your job, it's going to make you a better employee. And if you're working for yourself, it's going to make you more self-sufficient, which can only benefit you in the long run. So anyway, just want to give a little update on that. Overall, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you a better idea of what to expect in the course. The material overall is really in depth. This is a long course. Don't expect to move through it quickly, and make sure to give yourself plenty of time to go over the material repeatedly just so that it sinks in. Finally, as I mentioned, I'm going to come out with my next video talking about how I studied for the written and oral portions of the assessment for the JS120 course, which is the follow-on assessment course JS129. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the like button below and subscribe. And as always, make sure to come back and check out the channel for more content just like this.